At breaking point, the screams echoed through the communication array, piercing the silence of the Nexus Station's diplomatic quarters. Commander Sarah Chun stood frozen, her coffee cup trembling in her hands as the emergency broadcast crackled through the speakers. New Geneva Colony was burning. 300,000 souls, reduced to static and ash in the span of an hour. Sarah's reflection stared back at her from the darkened viewport, her Asian features drawn tight with a familiar pain. She had seen this before. The same helpless rage, the same gut-wrenching loss. 20 years ago, it had been her family on Kepler Station. Today, it was someone else's children screaming across the void. The Zephyrian attack had come without warning, without provocation, without mercy. Their crystalline warships had emerged from hyperspace like silver daggers, cutting through the colony's minimal defenses as if they were paper. The mining settlement had no military value, no strategic importance. It was simply in the way of. Zephyrian expansion. Sarah set down her cup with deliberate care, her hands steady now. She had been Earth's chief diplomatic representative to the Galactic Council for 5 years, preaching peace, building bridges, convincing the galaxy that humanity could be trusted. All of that ended the moment the first human child died in Zephyrian. Fire. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened within hours. Representatives from dozens of species filled the circular chamber, their various forms creating a cacophony of clicks, whistles, and translated voices. Sarah stood at the human podium, isolated in the center of the room, waiting for justice that would never come. Chancellor Vexhai of the Altarian Republic called for order, his forearms gesturing grandly. The Council recognizes the tragedy that has befallen the human colonies, he began, his synthesized voice carrying false sympathy. However, we must consider the broader implications of any response. The Zephyrian ambassador, a towering creature of living crystal named Shard Singer, Kethmer, rose with the sound of wind chimes. The disputed territories had been claimed by the Zephyrian Empire for 3 cycles. The human presence was unfortunate. Sarah felt something cold settle in her chest. Disputed territories, as if 300,000 lives could be dismissed. With bureaucratic language. She had heard these same words before, on a dozen different worlds, watching as the Council chose political convenience over justice. Ambassador Chun, Chancellor Vexhai continued, humanity must understand that military action against the Zephyrian Empire would destabilize the entire sector. The Council cannot authorize. I didn't ask for authorization. Sarah's voice cut through the chamber like a blade. The translator circuits carried her words to every species present, each one hearing the steel in her tone. I came here to deliver a message. The chamber fell silent. Even the Zephyrian's crystalline form seemed to dim as Sarah stepped forward, her boots echoing against the polished floor. She had practiced diplomacy for years, learned to smile and compromise and find middle ground. That woman died with New Geneva Colony. For 50 years, humanity has played by your rules, Sarah began, her voice carrying to every corner of the chamber. We've negotiated in good faith. We've accepted your borders, your trade agreements, your territorial disputes. We've been the galaxy's good neighbors. She turned slowly, making eye contact with representatives from a dozen worlds. We've watched the Drakmari enslave entire populations while you debated sanctions. We've seen the hegemony glass 3 worlds while you formed committees. We've been patient because we believed in this council, in the idea that civilized beings could resolve conflicts without bloodshed. Shardsinger Kethmer chimed with what might have been amusement. The humans speak of civilization while threatening. Violence, how predictable. Sarah smiled, and every human who had ever known her would have recognized the expression. It was the same smile she had worn in the trenches of Proxima Centauri, the same cold promise she had given to the pirates who had murdered her sister. You misunderstand me, Ambassador. I'm not threatening violence. I'm explaining inevitability. The temperature in the chamber seemed to drop. Sarah's voice remained conversational, almost casual, but something in her tone made even the boldest representatives shift uncomfortably. You see, there's something about humans that you've never quite grasped in your councils and committees, she continued. We're very good at pretending to be civilized. We build pretty cities and write poetry and hold diplomatic conferences. But underneath all of that culture and refinement, we're still the same species that crawled out of caves and conquered a world full of predators. She paused, letting the silence stretch. The same species that looked at an endless void and decided to make it our home. The same species that turned sand into glass and glass into starships. The same species that has never, in its entire history, backed down from a fight. Chancellor Veshai's 4 arms were now perfectly still. Ambassador Chun, surely you're not suggesting. I'm not suggesting anything, Sarah interrupted. I'm telling you exactly what's going to happen. The Zephyrian Empire has declared war on humanity by attacking our civilians. The Galactic Council has chosen to abandon us by refusing to act. So humanity will act alone. The Zephyrian ambassadors. Crystalline form brightened with what might have been anger. The Empire fears no primitive species. Your scattered colonies and single homeworld cannot threaten our scattered colonies? Sarah laughed, and the sound held no warmth. You think Earth is all we have? You think our colonies are scattered and defenseless? She activated her personal display, projecting a holographic star map into the center of the chamber. Red dots began appearing, hundreds of them, scattered throughout Zephyrian space and beyond. Every human settlement you've cataloged, Sarah explained, her voice taking on a lecturer's tone. Every mining station, every research outpost, every diplomatic embassy. You've been so careful to count them all, haven't you? The dots continued multiplying. The Zephyrian ambassador's light dimmed as the true scope became clear. There weren't hundreds of human settlements. There were thousands. Hidden bases, camouflaged stations, entire colonies that had never appeared on any galactic registry. See, we learned something during our first contact with galactic civilization, Sarah continued. We learned that the galaxy is a dangerous place, full of species who see kindness as weakness and peace as opportunity. So we prepared. She gestured to the hologram, where new markers were appearing in deep space. Not settlements now, but something else. Something that made several representatives gasp in recognition. Defense platforms, weapon satellites, mobile battle stations. For 50 years, while we've been playing diplomacy, we've also been building the largest military network in known space. Every asteroid belt, every dead system, every patch of empty space that you ignored because it had no value. The silence in the chamber was absolute now. Even the translation circuits seemed to whisper as Sarah delivered her final words. The Zephyrian Empire wanted to test human resolve. You wanted to see what we would do when pushed. Well, congratulations. You're about to find out what happens when you corner a species that spent 10,000 years learning how to kill everything that tried to eat them. She turned to face Shard Senior Kethmer directly, her smile never wavering. You have 48 hours to withdraw from all human space and surrender the commanders responsible for the New Geneva massacre. If you refuse, if you attack another human settlement, if you so much as scratch the paint on one of our ships, ... Sarah's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but every translator in the chamber carried her words with crystal clarity. We'll turn your stars to ash. The emergency session ended in chaos. Representatives fled to their ships, desperate to carry warnings to their homeworlds. The galaxy had lived in peace for so long that they had forgotten what war looked like. They were about to remember. Sarah walked slowly to her quarters. past viewports showing the traffic lanes around Nexus Station. Ships were already scattering, carrying news of humanity's ultimatum to every corner of known space. In 46 hours, the Zephyrian Empire would give their answer. She already knew what it would be. Empires didn't surrender. They couldn't. Because surrender meant admitting they could be beaten. The Zephyrians would double down, convince themselves that humanity was bluffing, and attack another target to prove their strength. Sarah opened a secured communication channel to Earth. Admiral Harrison's weathered face appeared on the screen, his expression grim. "I saw the broadcast," he said without preamble. "The Senate is already mobilizing the ghost fleets. How long do we have?" "Not long enough," Sarah replied. "The Zephyrians will respond with force. They have to, or they lose face with their client. Species, when they do, we give them exactly what they asked for." Harrison finished. "Sarah, are you ready for this? Once we start, there's no going back. The galaxy will never see us the same way." Sarah thought of New Geneva Colony, of 300,000 voices silenced in the span of an hour. She thought of her sister, her parents, all the innocent dead who had trusted in diplomacy and civilization to protect them. "Good," she said quietly. "It's time they saw us as we really are." The reckoning, the Zephyrian response, came exactly as Sarah had predicted. Not a withdrawal, not a negotiation, but another attack. This time they chose Harmony Station, a research facility studying peaceful applications of quantum technology. The attack was swift, brutal, and broadcast across the galaxy as a demonstration of Zephyrian power. 2 hours later, the demonstration became a funeral. Sarah stood in the war room beneath Geneva, surrounded by holographic displays showing fleet movements across 3 sectors. The buried facility had been humanity's most closely guarded secret, a command center that could coordinate military operations across the entire galaxy. For 50 years, it had waited in silence. Today, it came alive. Admiral Harrison moved between the displays like a conductor directing a symphony of destruction. Ghost Fleet Alpha is in position around the Kefter system. Beta Fleet has interdicted the trade routes to Zephyrian Prime. Gamma Fleet is dark, moving on the shipyards at Silthara. Each fleet represented more firepower than most species possessed in their entire military. Ships that had been built in secret, crewed by volunteers who had trained for decades for this moment. Weapons systems that pushed the boundaries of physics, developed in hidden laboratories scattered throughout human space. "Status on the Hammer protocols?" Sarah asked. "Standing by," replied Dr. Elizabeth Reyes, the architect of humanity's most terrifying weapons. "All stellar manipulation devices are online and targeted. We can begin solar destabilization on your command." Sarah nodded, feeling the weight of worlds pressing down on her shoulders. The Hammer protocols were humanity's ultimate weapon, the ability to turn stars themselves into weapons. It had taken 30 years to perfect the technology, another 20 to position the necessary equipment. No other species in the galaxy even knew it was possible. The first reports began coming in within hours. Zephyrian outposts throughout their border regions simply vanished. No distress calls, no wreckage, no survivors. One moment they were there, the next they were gone, leaving only empty space and confused enemy patrols. How are they doing? The intercepted Zephyrian military communications crackled with panic. "Our sensors show nothing, then the entire station just disappears." Sarah allowed herself a small smile. Stealth technology was another human innovation that the galaxy had never suspected. While other species had focused on bigger guns and stronger shields, humanity had learned to become invisible. Ghost ships that could slip past any sensor net, weapons that struck without warning, soldiers who moved like shadows through enemy installations. The psychological effect was immediate and devastating. The Zephyrian Empire had built its reputation. on overwhelming force and inevitable victory. Suddenly, their forces were fighting an enemy they couldn't see, couldn't track, couldn't predict. Fear began to spread through their ranks like a plague dot by the end of the first day. 17 Zephyrian military installations had been eliminated. By the end of the second, the number had risen to 43. The pattern was always the same. No warning, no survivors, no evidence except empty space where proud facilities had once stood. Shard Singer Kethmer appeared on the emergency communication channel, his crystalline form flickering with agitation. Ambassador Chon, the Empire is prepared to discuss terms. No. Sarah's response was immediate and final. You had your chance for negotiation 48 hours ago. You chose to murder more innocents instead. Now we finish what you started. You cannot sustain this campaign. Kethmer's voice rose to a crystalline shriek. The Empire has allies, resources, entire fleets that haven't even engaged yet. Good, Sarah replied calmly. Send them all. Let's see how many ships you're willing to lose before you realize the truth. What truth? Sarah's expression never changed, but her voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. That you picked a fight with the wrong species. The communication cut off, leaving Sarah alone with her thoughts and the soft hum of war machines coming to life. Around her, displays showed the systematic dismantling of Zephyrian power. Every military installation, every weapons depot, every strategic asset was being methodically erased from existence. But it wasn't enough. Military targets were just the beginning. The Zephyrians had chosen to make war on civilians, to target the helpless and innocent. They needed to understand that such actions carried consequences beyond their imagining. Admiral, Sarah said quietly, activate the Damocles Protocol. Harrison paused, his finger hovering over the authorization panel. Sarah, are you certain? Once we cross this line, ... They crossed it first when they burned New Geneva Colony, she replied. They crossed it again when they attacked Harmony Station. They want to see what humanity becomes when pushed to the edge? Let's show them. The Damocles Protocol was the logical extension of human military doctrine. If an enemy chose to target civilians, then the distinction between military and civilian targets would be eliminated entirely. Not through the murder of innocents, but through the systematic destruction of everything that made civilization possible. Infrastructure, power systems, communication networks, transportation hubs, food distribution centers, medical facilities. That served military personnel, government installations. Everything that allowed a star-spanning empire to function would be reduced to scrap and memory. The attacks began at dawn, Zephyrian time, across 17 worlds simultaneously. Power grids collapsed, plunging entire continents into darkness. Communication satellites went silent, cutting planets off from their neighbors. Transportation systems failed, stranding millions. Supply chains snapped like overtaxed cables. Within 6 hours, the Zephyrian Empire had been reduced from a galactic power to a collection of isolated worlds, each one struggling to maintain basic civilization without support from the others. It was a level of coordinated destruction that most species couldn't have imagined, let alone executed. The galaxy watched in stunned silence as the most powerful empire in known space simply ... stopped working. No worlds burned, no populations died, but the machine of empire ground to a halt as every critical system failed simultaneously. Impossible, whispered the Altarian Chancellor, his forearms trembling as he watched the reports. No single species has the resources for such an operation. The logistics alone. But humanity had spent 50 years preparing for exactly this scenario. Every settlement, every station, every hidden base had been positioned and supplied for. Maximum strategic impact. When the time came to act, they hadn't needed to build a military machine. They had simply activated the one that already existed, On the third day, Shard Singer Kethmer appeared again on the communication channels, but this time he was not alone. The Zephyrian High Command, their crystalline forms dimmed with defeat, stood behind him. Ambassador Chun, Kethmer's voice was barely above a whisper. The Empire formally requests terms for surrender. Sarah studied the defeated leaders, feeling no satisfaction in their humiliation. This wasn't about conquest or glory. It was about making sure that no other species would ever again mistake human diplomacy for human weakness. The terms are simple, she replied. Complete withdrawal from all disputed territories. Reparations for the families of New Geneva and Harmony Station. And most importantly, a formal acknowledgement that attacks on human civilians will result in the complete destruction of your civilization. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. This was your warning, Shard Singer. The next species that decides to test human resolve won't be given the chance to surrender. They'll simply cease to exist. The surrender was signed within hours. The Zephyrian Empire, which had terrorized the galaxy for centuries, formally submitted to the demands of a species they had dismissed as primitive. The news spread through the galaxy at light speed, carried by the same communication networks that had witnessed humanity's impossible military campaign in the weeks that followed. Other aggressive species began withdrawing from their own disputed territories. Trade agreements were renegotiated, this time with considerably more favorable terms for human interests. Diplomatic invitations flooded in from worlds that had previously ignored human ambassadors. Sarah stood again at the viewport of Nexus Station, watching the traffic lanes that now carried a very different kind of vessel. Human ships moved openly through space that had been forbidden to them just weeks before. The galaxy's new reality was settling into place. Admiral Harrison joined her, both of them watching a Zephyrian trade convoy carefully navigate around a cone. Human patrol. Think they've learned their lesson? Sarah considered the question, thinking of all the species that had witnessed humanity's response to aggression. The galaxy was vast, full of predators who saw weakness as opportunity. But they had all watched the same broadcasts, seen the same impossible displays of coordinated power. They learned something, she replied finally. They learned that humans are very good at pretending to be civilized. But when you threaten our children, when you attack our innocent, she smiled, the same cold expression that had terrified the Galactic Council weeks before. You get to watch your worlds burn. The galaxy had entered a new age, one where humanity's diplomatic smile carried an unspoken promise. Peace was still possible, cooperation still desirable, civilization still worth preserving. But every species now understood the price of testing. Human resolve. Some lessons, Sarah reflected, were worth teaching only once.